The Miami Dolphins 53-man roster is set, and we are going to break it down on today's show. Welcome to Miami Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. I am Nick Roloff. We had some surprising cuts, and we have an interesting roster to go through on today's episode. But make sure you do have your notifications turned on. We told you guys that we're going to break down the roster and everything surrounding the Miami Dolphins, so make sure you don't miss a video, and you would have been alerted if you had your notifications turned on. Only 15% of you do, which is 8.8K. So if you don't have your notifications turned on, make sure you click that bell and click all instead of personalized. But also, if you are not subscribed, please do so because we're dropping daily content surrounding the Miami Dolphins. All right, we'll start with the quarterbacks. This one we'll gloss over here because once Mike White was cut on Sunday morning, it was very clear that the Dolphins were only keeping Tua Tagovailoa and Skylar Thompson. No backups right now, but I do expect Miami to make a move in the quarterback department, whether it be signing someone to the practice squad tomorrow afternoon or bringing someone into the full 53-man roster, which we can talk about as well, potentially Jameis Winston if he's available via trade. Either way, this is where it stands right now, but I do expect the Dolphins to add someone to their practice squad or 53-man over the next 48 hours. Let's go over to running backs here because this is the first time that we had a little bit of a move that was questionable, right? You always knew that Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jalen Wright were going to be on this roster as your top three backs, and Alec Ingold was always going to be on the squad as well at fullback. The question is, who is going to be RB4? Now, most of the preseason and training camp, I was projecting Jeff Wilson Jr. to be cut by Miami, and they ultimately go with Chris Brooks. Well, as of yesterday, if you watched our roster prediction video, I actually switched it at the last second, and with Brooks' injury, I believe Jeff Wilson was going to be the RB4. That ultimately is the case. They keep the longtime veteran who has a $1.3 million cap hit. Brooks waived with that injury. Unfortunately, he is just too banged up to be on this team that is already dealing with a lot more injuries. So hopefully Chris Brooks lands on a different team because I think he's talented, and I really hope that he ultimately gets somewhere where he can flourish because I think he is a solid running back. All right, there was a lot of cuts that surprised people. We'll get to it with Eric Ezukanma, Nick Needham, Chris Brooks. But let me know who you thought was the most surprising cut. Could have been the long snapper Blake Ferguson, which we'll talk about at the end of today's video as well. But drop a name for me down in the comment section. In a stunning move, the Dolphins only kept 4 wide receivers on the 53-man roster. I have not looked at the rest of the rosters in the NFL, but I would be willing to bet that the Dolphins are one of the only teams, if not the only teams, to keep 4 wide receivers on their initial 53-man. Now, River Craycraft was placed on IR, that new rule where you're allowed 2 players to get on IR before the roster cutdown day, so Craycraft could return after week 4. But with OBJ remaining on the PUP list, Craycraft going on IR, and then them ultimately cutting Eric Ezukanma, Miami only carries 4 wide receivers through the initial 53-man roster period. Now, I don't expect that to be the case for a while. I imagine they look to sign someone in free agency potentially or trade for someone to add a 5th guy to this room for the first 4 games of the season because, listen, I like Malik, but I don't believe in Washington or Berrios to be a consistent wide receiver 3 on this team. I don't care how good Tyreek and Jalen Waddle are. You need someone better than those 2 at wide receiver 3 for the first 4 games. The Dolphins ended up keeping 4 tight ends here, which I don't think is that surprising considering how clear it was that McDaniel and this team liked Tanner Conner. The Jonnu Smith, Durham Smythe, and Julian Hill, big 3, they were always being kept. But Tanner Conner was a little bit of a shocker, had a really strong preseason, really strong training camp, outplayed Jody Fortson Jr., who I thought had a chance of making this team. But McDaniel, who has kept 2 tight ends, 5 tight ends, and now 4 tight ends. So he is not someone who stays consistent in how many tight ends he keeps in his first 3 seasons as Miami Dolphins head coach. But I do expect big things from this group because I love Jonnu Smith, and I like the tandem of Smythe and Hill backing up Jonnu. And I would expect to see a lot of 2 tight end sets early on in the year with how many injuries at wide receiver. Offensive line was a little bit of a stunner, and we have our first of 2 UDFAs this season that made the Dolphins roster. Andrew Meyer, the center from UTEP, who ultimately could be the long snapper for Miami. Now, I don't know if Meyer's going to be on this team long term. Now, if the Dolphins want to claim someone on waiver wire or sign someone else or make a trade, maybe Meyer ends up getting released. But right now, this looks like your starting offensive line for week 1. And I think it's important that Aaron Brewer did not get placed on IR or anything like the PUP list to start off the year, because if that was the case, then they wouldn't have felt confident about him being able to go in the first couple weeks of the season. But with him being on the active roster right now, I would expect Aaron Brewer to at least be playing in week 1 or week 2 for the Miami Dolphins. Kendall Lamb, Jack Driscoll, Lester Cotton, and rookie Patrick Paul are your backups to what this looks like the starting O-line for the Dolphins, assuming Aaron Brewer can go a couple weeks from today against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to get to the defense in just a second, but we do have to shout out Game Time, the best ticketing app on the market. And if you want to get tickets to go see this Dolphins roster in action during the regular season, there's no other place to go get your tickets than Game Time. They have the best deals and best features that make purchasing tickets so easy. All-in pricing, which allows you to see your total ticket price up front. There is no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views inside your arena. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. That goes for a concert, goes for a comedy show, theater, or a sporting event. It does not matter. And they also have the lowest price guaranteed. If you find a ticket price cheaper on a different service than Game Time in the same exact seat, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time is in the business of making your life easier and getting you the lowest price guaranteed. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app today, create an account, and use code ChatSports for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem code ChatSports, ChatSports, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, defensive line as we switch over to the other side of the football field. 5 defensive linemen capped. This does not include edge rushers for Miami. Zach Sealer, Calais Campbell were your locks. Benito Jones is your leading nose tackle on this squad. He is banged up with an injury. Good to see him not placed on IR or anything like that, at least as of right now. Hopefully he'll be able to go early on in the season for Miami. Deshaun Hand and Brandon Pillai are your 2 backups. I think Hand and Pillai both had strong preseasons, and I'm not shocked at all that they were capped. I actually think I nailed this in my roster prediction yesterday. I did not get all of them right, and I actually missed out on a lot of projections, unfortunately, but defensive line is one that I did think I got right here. This is an intriguing group to watch how they handle Christian Wilkins leaving from a year ago. A lot of linebacker talk here, and we combined edges and interior linebackers. We'll start with the interior linebackers. They kept 5. They did the thing. Channing Tindall, who is someone we have talked about at extreme length during this preseason. He ultimately played well enough to get another opportunity on this team, at least as of right now. I always knew they were going to keep Duke Riley, Anthony Walker Jr., David Long Jr., and Jordan Brooks. But Channing Tindall plays his way onto this roster as the 5th linebacker. And then Emmanuel Ogbah and Jalen Phillips are your starting edges, with Chop Robinson, Mo Kamara, and Quentin Bell also in rotation. No surprises on the edge department. With Bradley Chubb on the PUP list, those 5 are going to be the players that you're going to rely on generating pressure for this Miami Dolphins team from the outside. Let's switch over to cornerbacks now as we talk about secondary. This one, it had a stunner. Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, and Kader Kohou, no surprise there as your starting 3 guys. Ethan Bonner and Saran Neal, I projected to make this roster. Bonner has been someone who has been fantastic during training camp and preseason. He felt like a lock as we continue to move throughout camp. Saran Neal played well enough to earn a roster spot too. But our guy, the UDFA baby out of Louisville in North Carolina, Storm Duck, all name team as well, makes this team over Nick Needham. Needham got released earlier today. We let you know about that in a short. That's why you subscribe. But it was a little bit of a shocker to see Needham released, considering He could play a little bit of safety. He could play a little bit of corner. And he's been on this team since 2019 as a UDFA out of UTEP himself, but he gets replaced by UDFA in Storm Duck. Duck had a really solid preseason, and I'm happy to see him stick on this Dolphins team long term. Hopefully, it's not just for a couple hours and he gets released tomorrow when the Dolphins go out and sign someone or waiver claim a player, but Storm is at least through the initial 53. We'll talk about the safeties here because I didn't think they were going to go 5 deep at safety, but they did. Javon Holland and Jordan Poyer, you're starting tandem. Elijah Campbell and Marcus May is the last people I projected to make this team as safeties, but they do keep the 6th-round pick out of Cal, Patrick McMorris, who they drafted in just April. McMorris had a really strong preseason, missed the final game, but played really well in the first 2, specifically in that first one against Atlanta. McMorris, I don't know if he's going to see a lot of PT this year, maybe be a special teams guy, but McMorris is someone the Dolphins and Chris Grier clearly like long-term, and they keep him through the first initial 53-man roster. One of the other stunners, the special teams department. Jason Sanders and Jake Bailey are your 2 kicker and punters, but no Blake Ferguson. Yes, they do not keep Ferguson on the initial 53-man roster. The long snapper I thought was a lock to make this team. Evidently not the case. Now, there is a scenario in which he just gets brought back tomorrow if someone on this Dolphins team gets put on IR. For example, Benito Jones, who's been dealing with an injury. If he gets placed on IR tomorrow and has to miss an extended period of time, maybe they just replace that roster spot with Blake Ferguson. But we'll ultimately see what happens with him. I wish him the luck. I would like to see him back on this team. But if not, the Dolphins are going to have to find a new long snapper. All right, you saw it. 53 players, the final roster of the preseason, and now this team will start preparing for Week 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Grade it for me. You saw all the positions, all the names. Let me know how the Dolphins roster stacks up right now with a letter grade A, B, C, D, or F. I did want to highlight some of the top players cut here, and we did mention them as we went throughout, like Chris Brooks, like Nick Needham, Blake Ferguson, Eric Ezukama. But there's some other names as well that I wouldn't say caught me by surprise, but are players that I would like to see end up on the Dolphins practice squad tomorrow after 11 p.m. Central Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, when the waiver wire is announced. Mark Perry, Isaiah Johnson, Curtis Bolton, and Jonathan Harris are all names that I'd like to see stick around with Miami. Thought Bolton played extremely well in the preseason. So did the UDFA Isaiah Johnson out of Syracuse. Mark Perry out of TCU. I'd also add Hayden Rucci to this list as well as a player that I would like to see on this practice squad. Dolphins like him, as it was reported earlier by Barry Jackson, UDFA out of Wisconsin from 2024. I think he could be someone that gets signed to the practice squad. There are 2 names that you didn't see, but we do want to mention, Cam Smith and River Craycraft. We talked about it a little bit in this episode, about how the new NFL rule that allows you to put 2 players on IR going into the 53-man roster release, but not end their season. You get 2 slots. They filled them with Cam Smith and River Craycraft. So this means that both of them will be out for the first 4 games of the season. So they're missing Seattle, Tennessee, Jacksonville, and Buffalo, not in any order there, for the first 4 games of the year. And then they will come back onto this team. Likely Craycraft gets kept, obviously Cam Smith. So that's a future problem where a couple players might get cut when they get reinstated. But either way, Smith, Craycraft on IR. Also, by the way, that is when Odell Beckham Jr. will be able to come off the PUP list. Same with Bradley Chubb. So those are going to be 4 players returning for Miami in Week 5 against New England potentially. Not guaranteed they return and play in that game, but that's when they'll be eligible to do so. All right, make sure you are subscribed to the channel because we're going to break down everything around the Miami Dolphins, like this video right here. But also be on the lookout early tomorrow morning because we're going to put out a video of waiver wire targets for the Miami Dolphins that they could end up claiming and could end up targeting when it's announced at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure you're subscribed and be on the lookout for that video.